The dog vanished first. That was what nobody told you about alien contact. It wasn't the ships that broke you. It wasn't the broadcasts, the global panic, the government scrambling for microphones. It was the small things. The ordinary things that stopped being ordinary without warning. Rex was a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois, retired from the K9 unit after a bomb blast took half his hearing. I'd adopted him 3 years ago, and, in that time he'd slept at my feet every night, eaten from a bowl with his name scratched into the metal, and never once wandered farther than my front porch without looking back to check I was still there. He was gone when I woke at 0430. The door was still locked. The windows were still latched. The sensor alarm I'd installed last month, the one that pinged my phone if anything heavier than a raccoon crossed the perimeter, had not made a single sound. I found his leash untouched on the hook. I found his bowl still half full. I found a single paw print in the dewy grass near the east fence, and, then, nothing. No trail. No scent that my own limited nose could follow. I was on the phone with animal control before the sun fully rose, not because I expected them to help, but because doing something was better than standing in the yard with my chest caving in. The officer on the line was kind and useless. She reminded me that pets had been behaving strangely all month. Everyone knew why. The Velthri had arrived 22 days ago. Their ships hadn't landed so much as appeared. Massive, dark, asymmetrical structures that settled into low orbit like stones placed gently onto still water. No weapons fired. No demands made. They sent one communication, text only, through every frequency simultaneously. We are here to observe. We will not interfere. Please continue. Governments didn't know whether to celebrate or evacuate. Scientists lost their minds with joy and terror in equal measure. Religious institutions issued 17 different contradictory statements in the first 48 hours. And the animals, dogs, cats, birds, even livestock in some rural reports, began acting strange. Not aggressive. Not frightened. Drawn. I'd noticed it in Rex 2 weeks back. He'd sit at the window facing north for hours, ears angled, tail still. Not the alert posture of a dog tracking a squirrel. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like listening. I hadn't reported it because it hadn't felt dangerous. It had felt private, somehow. Like watching someone pray. Now he was gone, and I was walking the perimeter of my property at dawn with a flashlight, trying not to think about the Velthri ship that had repositioned itself 3 days ago. Lower, closer, hovering at the edge of the county's northern ridge like a second moon. My neighbor Carlos flagged me down from across the fence. He was still in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, eyes red. "Your dog too?" he asked. I stopped walking. "What?" "Bella's gone. Since maybe 2 in the morning." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. Bella was his 6-year-old German Shepherd, the one that always barked at my truck and, then, wagged her tail like she was embarrassed about it. I checked the cameras. There's nothing on them. It's like she stepped out of the frame and kept going. "What direction?" I asked. He pointed north. I was already moving before I finished thinking about it, cutting through my back gate, crossing the field behind the property line, heading toward the ridge. The logical part of my brain kept filing objections. No plan, no weapon, no authorization, no idea what I was walking toward. I filed all of those objections away under deal with it later and kept moving. The grass was still wet. The sky was that particular shade of pre-sunrise gray that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I pulled out my phone and called my former unit commander, not because she could do anything in the next 20 minutes, but because someone needed to know where I was going. She answered on the second ring. That was how I knew she was already awake, already watching the ridge. "Santos," she said. No greeting. Just my name, which in her voice was already a question. "My dog is missing. Heading north toward the ridge. You seeing anything up there?" A pause. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Long enough that my stride faltered. "Lucas," she said, and she used my first name, which she almost never did. "There is a Velthri shuttle on the ground at the base of the ridge. It's been there for 4 hours. We have teams assembling, but standing orders are observe only. Do not approach. Do not engage." I looked at the ridge. I looked at the empty field between me and it. How many dogs? I asked. Another pause. 17 confirmed so far, she said. Across 6 counties. I didn't stop walking. The shuttle was smaller than I expected. That was the first surprise. After 3 weeks of looking at images of those vast orbital structures, something that fit inside a large warehouse felt almost humble. It had landed in a clearing between 2 old oaks, its surface a deep matte black that seemed to absorb the early light rather than reflect it. No seams that I could identify. No obvious doors or windows. It sat on 4 struts that curved organically from its base like the legs of something alive. The dogs were in front of it. All 17 of them, I counted without meaning to, sitting in a loose semicircle facing the shuttle. Not pressed together in fear. Not scattered in confusion. Arranged, almost, like an audience. Rex was near the center, his posture relaxed, his remaining good ear turned toward the ship. Bella sat 2 places to his left. None of them looked at me when I walked up. That was the second surprise. Rex always looked at me. Even when he was focused on something else, some old protection instinct always swiveled part of his attention in my direction the moment I was within 50 feet. It was one of the things I had come to depend on without ever naming it. He didn't look. I crouched at the edge of the semicircle, maybe 10 feet back, and waited. The air smelled different here, cleaner, somehow, with something underneath it that I couldn't name. Not chemical. Not mechanical. Almost botanical, like the inside of a greenhouse after rain. The shuttle made no sound I could consciously hear. But I felt something at the edge of my frequency range, a vibration that sat just below hearing and above feeling, like standing next to a speaker playing a note too low for words. The dogs heard it clearly. I watched Rex's ear track a microshift in direction, and then the shuttle changed. That was the only word I had for it. A section of the hull didn't open so much as become open. One moment a solid surface, the next a passage, with warm amber light beyond it. A figure stepped out. She was small. That was what hit me first. Not the proportions, which were broadly humanoid in the way that certain insects are broadly humanoid, bilateral symmetry, 2 limbs for locomotion, 2 for manipulation, but the scale. She stood perhaps 4 feet tall, with a build that suggested youth rather than species standard. Her skin, if that was the right word, was a deep iridescent grey-green, and it shifted subtly with each breath, like oil on water. Her eyes were large and dark and arranged slightly wider than a human face would allow, and they caught the early light and held it. She was a child. She stepped down from the shuttle's threshold with the careful deliberateness of someone following instructions they weren't entirely sure they agreed with. Behind her, filling the doorway without stepping through it, was another figure, taller, still, composed, watching. An escort. A guard. Every line of its posture said, I am here. I am watching. I will not intervene unless I must. The child walked toward the dogs. Rex stood. Not in alarm. The motion was fluid, welcoming. His tail moved in that slow, serious sweep that I'd only ever seen him use with people he'd decided to trust completely, after long consideration. Not the frantic wagging of excitement. The deeper, quieter signal. She stopped in front of him, reached out one 4-fingered hand, fingers longer than a human child's, and held it palm up. He sniffed it. Then, he pressed his head into her palm. Every dog in the semicircle shifted. A ripple of something moved through them, not agitation, recognition. Like watching 17 separate decisions arrive at the same conclusion simultaneously. I realized I was holding my breath. The child looked up from Rex and found me. I don't know how she knew I was there, or how she identified me as is specifically, but she looked directly at me with those wide dark eyes and something in her expression shifted. Not threat. Not surprise. Something that I could only describe as consideration. The guard in the doorway moved. Not forward, just a weight shift, attention sharpening. I raised both hands, palms out. Slow. Clear. The child watched my hands. Then, she looked back at Rex. She said something, a sequence of sounds I couldn't parse, layered, harmonic, like a chord made of consonants. Rex's ear tracked it with the focused precision of a dog who has spent years learning to hear meaning in sound. He sat back down. Calm. Deliberate. Then, he looked at me. Finally. That look contained everything. 7 years of working alongside humans. 3 years of retirement at my feet. All of it expressed in the particular angle of his head, the particular steadiness of his gaze. He wasn't asking permission. He was explaining. I know her, the look said. I've known her for 2 weeks. She has been talking to me and I have been listening. And she needs something, and I am trying to help her give it to you. I lowered my hands. I took 1 step forward. The guard's weight shifted again, and this time I heard the faintest sound from inside the shuttle. Movement, other presences, a held decision waiting to fall. But the guard did not step through the threshold. Protocol held. And something about that restraint told me more about the Velthari in 3 seconds than 22 days of orbital observation had managed. They had rules. And they were choosing to hold them. I crouched down so my eyes were level with the child's. Close enough now to see the fine structures of her face, the subtle ridge lines, the way her pupils weren't round but hexagonal, the faint luminescence at her temple that pulsed slow and steady like a heartbeat made visible. She reached into a fold of her garment and withdrew something. Set it carefully on the ground between us. It was a small object, flat, oval, about the size of my palm, made of the same dark material as the shuttle. And it was covered in marks, deliberate, fine, repeating, that were clearly language. A message. She met my eyes. She touched her chest with 1 hand. Then she touched Rex's head. Then she pointed at the object on the ground. And I understood, without translation, without technology, without 22 days of diplomatic protocol, she was a child who had been reaching across an impossible distance to talk to someone. And the only ones who had heard her were the dogs. I picked up the message. I spent 3 hours at the base of that ridge before anyone else arrived. The child, I would learn her name later, transliterated into something my throat could attempt, Velith, sat cross-legged in the grass with Rex's head in her lap and communicated through a combination of the object she'd given me and a device her guard eventually passed to her through the shuttle doorway. The guard never left the threshold. Never spoke. Observed everything with the patience of someone who had decided, with full authority, to permit this. That patience cost them something. I could feel it. The device was a translation interface, crude by what I suspected were their standards, but functional. It worked in text, rendering her meaning in English that was grammatically strange but emotionally clear. She was 12 years old by their reckoning, which corresponded to roughly 8 or 9 in human developmental terms. She had been aboard the observation vessel with her mother's diplomatic delegation. She had not been authorized to make contact. She had done it anyway. The small ones heard the calling frequencies. She typed through the device, watching the words appear with obvious satisfaction that they matched her intent. Your bound companions. We use these frequencies in our nurseries. I did not know they would travel so far. I did not know they would answer. You've been broadcasting nursery frequencies. I said it aloud, then typed it for clarity. Yes. I was lonely. I did not anticipate contact. I looked at Rex. He was fully asleep now, his paws twitching in whatever dogs dream about, his breathing slow. Whatever tension had brought him here had resolved into the deepest rest I'd ever seen him take. Your mother, I typed. Does she know you're here? The pause before her answer was long enough that I had my answer before the words appeared. She knows now. That was when the second shuttle appeared. It didn't land so much as settle, faster than the first, more deliberate, touching down 40 meters away with a precision that made my chest tight. This one was larger. The hull was the same matte black, but the surface was marked with structures the first shuttle didn't have, raised geometric patterns that caught the rising sun and scattered it in controlled directions. Status markers. I didn't need a translation guide to read authority into them. The door opened and the figure that stepped out was tall. Not height in the human sense, proportional to the child the way an adult is proportional to a young one, but carrying additional dimension in the way she moved. Every motion was calibrated. Every gesture contained awareness of exactly how much space it occupied. She wore something that wasn't quite armor and wasn't quite robes and was somewhere in the middle, lead deep violet and black, and her eyes were the same wide dark configuration as the child's but with decades of additional depth behind them. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the dogs. She looked at me. The guard from the first shuttle had straightened the moment this figure appeared. Not a bow, a realignment. The kind of posture adjustment that happens when the person who set your orders is suddenly standing in front of you. The tall figure walked to her daughter. Stopped beside her. looked down at Rex sleeping in Velitha's lap. And she was still for a long time. Not angry. Not relieved. Processing something that was clearly more complicated than either of those emotions. The child didn't flinch or speak. She waited, her hand resting on Rex's flank, rising and falling with his breath. The tall figure finally looked at me. She touched her chest. She said a word, a single syllable, low and resonant, that the translation device didn't catch but that my nervous system understood as a name. Then she gestured to the device and typed something herself, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone using a child's toy to carry an adult message. My daughter has put us all in a difficult position. I read it twice. Then I typed back, she was lonely. She found the only listeners she could reach. I don't think that's a difficult position. I think that's understandable. The Queen, I had understood by then what the markers on her shuttle meant, read my words. Her expression shifted. Not to warmth, exactly. To something that might have been its Veltri equivalent. She typed again. Our protocols prohibit contact until formal assessment is complete. 40 of your days remain. My daughter violated these protocols. And, yet. She paused. I watch her consider her next words with the care of someone choosing which tool to pick up. And, yet your bound companions came willingly. This has not occurred in 17 prior observation cycles. Not once. In each prior cycle, the animal species present fled or ignored. Your dogs came and stayed and allowed contact. Why does that matter? I typed. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because our protocols were designed on the assumption that trust must be formally established before it can exist. Your dogs suggest the assumption may be incorrect. The morning had fully arrived now. The dew was burning off the grass. Somewhere behind me I could hear vehicles, my former commander's people, finally, in position, maintaining distance, watching. The diplomatic machinery of two civilizations grinding into motion around a child and a sleeping dog. Velith had not moved throughout any of this. She sat in the grass with her eyes closed, her hand on Rex's side, matching her breathing to his. I watched the Queen watch her daughter. And I understood that whatever happened next, the 40 days of formal protocol, the assessments, the negotiations, the press conferences, the history books, all of it was downstream of this moment. A child had been lonely. The dogs had hurt her. A man had followed his dog through a locked gate without knowing why, and arrived at the pivot point of first contact wearing yesterday's clothes with grass stains on his knees. She didn't put us in a difficult position, I typed again. She put us in an honest one. The Queen read it. She did not respond immediately. Instead she lowered herself, slowly, with full dignity, with complete awareness that her guard was watching and that the humans behind me were watching and that this moment would be measured and analyzed for decades, and sat down in the grass beside her daughter. She reached out and, with one careful hand, touched Rex's ear. He didn't wake. He exhaled slowly, deeply, and his paws went still. The Queen pulled her hand back and looked at it the way you look at something that has surprised you by being real. Then she typed 4 words into the device and turned it to face me. Tell me about him. I sat down in the grass across from her. And I did. The formal contact summit began 37 days later instead of 40. No one announced why the timeline had moved. The official document cited favorable preliminary assessments and accelerated trust indicators without further elaboration. I was not at the summit. I was not a diplomat or a scientist or a government official. I was a man who had retired from the K9 unit and adopted a dog who couldn't hear properly, and I had no standing in the room where history was being made. But 3 hours before the summit opened, a message came through the official Veltri communication channel, the formal one, the one monitored by 6 governments and 14 intelligence agencies, and it was addressed specifically to me. It contained no words, just an image. Velith, sitting in a room that looked like the inside of the shuttle but larger, warmer, lit with amber light. Beside her, a small creature, quadrupedal, dark-furred, young, with its head pressed against her knee in the particular way that men trust. Beneath the image, a single line of English text. She is learning to listen. Like yours. I looked at Rex. He was on the couch, technically not allowed on the couch, doing it anyway, his half-deaf ears pointed at nothing in particular. I showed him the image. He looked at it, Then he looked at me. Then he put his head down on his paws and sighed with the profound satisfaction of a dog who has done exactly what he set out to do. I set the message down. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. In 3 hours, 2 civilizations would begin the most important conversation in recorded history. All the protocols, all the assessments, all the careful formal machinery would finally begin to turn. Because 17 dogs had sat in a field at dawn and refused to be afraid. Because one child had been lonely and reached across the dark with the only frequency she had. Because a half-deaf Belgian Malinois had listened when no one else was positioned to hear. The coffee brewed. Rex snored. Outside, the ship on the ridge caught the morning light and held it, patient as something that had learned patience from a long, long journey. The summit began. And, for the first time in 40 days, I wasn't afraid of what they'd find when they finally sat down face to face, because I had already seen what happened when 2 different kinds of beings stopped waiting for formal permission to be honest with each other. It looked like a dog asleep in a child's lap. It looked like a queen sitting in wet grass, touching a stranger's ear, and asking to understand. It looked like nothing that would ever make the history books, and everything that made history possible.